Good morning, YouTube. It is 10 a.m. in the great state of Texas, and today we're going on a journey to build what is, in my opinion, my worst table. So, somebody that I had made something for previously asked me to build them an outdoor table that they can sit around, lounge around their backyard, and have a couple of drinks and not worry about the weather ruining the table. And they had asked me to build them an outdoor little table. They didn't want it to be fancy. And I was like, first of all, I don't build fancy stuff. That's why we're using scrap wood today that has literally been sitting in the corner of my workshop for the past 3 years. So essentially what I'm doing here is taking some old scrap wood and trying to build something not fancy, but something that is respectable, that looks cool. And I decided, okay, we got to get rid of some of these boards that have been in the shop. There's nothing worse than being a wood hoarder as a woodworker, and I am guilty of that. I keep wood, I think I'm going to use it for something, and then I just never get around to doing it. And this is a great example of that. But this is an opportunity for me to take that scrap wood and actually build something kind of cool out of it. And that's what I was going for initially. I thought I'm going to take some old boards like this, cut them down into a relatively small shape. I think these are about 2 feet long, and just throw them on some legs. And that's what you saw me doing earlier in the video, was just unboxing those legs. And I wasn't a big fan of those legs, but I was like, okay, for what this needs to be, I think those will pretty much work. So essentially I'm building the table around the legs, but I really had this idea in my head as something simple and basic. But I wanted to jazz it up a little bit and not make something fancy, but kind of make something fancy. And this is essentially what this project is. So it's July in the state of Texas right now. It's about 1,000 degrees in the shade, and I could understand how somebody might want something just to put a beer or a drink or a beverage on and just be outside in the evening time when it's not 1,000 degrees. So once I got my boards cut down, then I went over to my jointer. And yes, I understand using your fingers to push the boards along is not the best technique. However, I am an amateur woodworker and I don't know what I'm doing most of the time, so that's going to continue here. But safety first, always keep safety in mind. And you know what? Luckily, I got to keep my fingers on this one, even though I was getting a lot of pushback on those. And a couple of these boards almost slipped out of my finger. And I was really grateful that I got to keep all my digits. So be careful. Don't use that technique. And then with my planer, which I barely ever get an opportunity to use, got everything jointed down. Now we're just planing everything to the nice level shape so everything is nice and even. Fed that through. Not a whole lot of issues though. Even I had to push through a lot of these pieces, and I have cleaned those belts and everything, and I still don't know what's wrong with this, and I spent way too much money on this to just throw it away. So it worked for what I wanted it to do. Now I have to do the glue up. And the glue up, this part goes relatively easy. So, so far I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be just something simple, not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. So getting the glue up, and everything is nice and level. And I'm going to put some weights on top of this to keep this from bowing. However, it's still bowed a little bit. No matter how many clamps and how many things I did to it, it still came out a little bowed. And I'm like, ugh, it's going to look so gross here in a little bit. And the joiner didn't get all those pieces. I probably could have spent a little bit more time doing that, but I guess I just didn't. So I thought everything was good, and I'm like, everything's going relatively well now. But 2 days later, I did the ungluing, but I could see a little bit of bowing and just a lot of problems with this, and I'm like, oh my god. So then I had to take my scraper or my chisel and just get out all the glue that had been just built up on this piece. And that's normal. You get any kind of squeeze out, you're going to have some of that. So that was to be expected. Not a whole lot of problems with that. You can see here, you can kind of see a little bit of that bowing of the wood, but we're going to come back and try to fix that in a little bit. And if you didn't notice from the beginning, there is scrap wood and then just regular boards in there as well. And I thought that gave it a nice, kind of texture. But essentially, this is just pine, this entire piece. So then it's about 90 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning. And that's why I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, because the UV rays are getting to me a little bit. So I had to wear a long sleeve shirt because I'm trying not to get sunburned. But I'm over here in sandals and cargo shorts doing the sanding. So did a lot of sanding, just blowing off all the dirt and dust and everything on both sides. And I'm like, okay, cool. We sanded out all the imperfections, and you get basically a cutting board kind of presentation. Now this is where the project really goes off the rails for me. So I have done plenty of spirals and galaxy type stuff, and I was like, okay, what you didn't see there is you can't even see it, but barely in there is a small little nail that ended up hitting my router and kind of broke the entire piece. So I was like, all right, so we got secret nails in here that I had to think about, which was a real pain in the ass. And then I started just doing this spiral type design that kind of gets out of hand really, really quickly. And I come back and change the chisel bit or the router bit, and it's all over the place. And I'm like, oh, this looks so bad in my opinion. But I keep going. I'm like, please just don't hit a nail or anything, and I'll be happy. Because the boards I actually used were from a pallet, and I thought I got all the nails. I thought I got it all out of there, but I guess I didn't, because I ended up hitting one in the beginning of this. But then I come back and change the router bit to a smaller diameter, and I start to get some cool designs, and I'm just like weaving through the wood in and out, just trying to do like this cool zigzag kind of pattern. And it looks okay. For what it is, I think it looks pretty cool. But I'm like, okay, it does not look good in my opinion. But you just keep going, because this is how we learn. So about 30 minutes later, I finish that up, and then I dig out all the sand, not the sand, but the wood chips that are in there. I'm like, okay, this is something, I guess. And just sanding off the edges, and I'm like, okay, then I got to figure out how to even things out on the bottom. And I really thought about using my track saw and my skill saw, but I don't have a track sled, so it was going to become uneven. Then I thought about putting it on the table saw, and I was like, that's not going to work. So I just ended up taking my rasp and trying to make everything even. So that took a couple hours to get done. And then I came back and did my signature. I was going to do this anyway, regardless of the design on the table, which was just burn the pine, because you got to do something to this pine to kind of spice it up a little bit. And this was the best idea that I had, because I am so unoriginal, and this is what it looks like. So then I'm like, okay, let's clean up the edges. And this part I thought went relatively well. This was a really cool technique. I really liked how this part came out. We just rounded off the edges on the top of the table. This is probably the highlight and the best part of this entire project right here. You can, kind of really tell, taking that square edge and just making it round. And then I just flipped it over and did the same thing on the other side. And I think this looks really good. So this is probably the highlight of the table here. There will be another one of these tables, and I will do this on both sides next time. But I really like this, and that white pine coming out against the dark burnt pine, I think looks really, really cool. So here we go to my classic epoxy pour, and this person likes the color black, so I was like, okay, we're gonna do a black table. But I thought this cool idea, since it was gonna be outdoors, would be to add some glow-in-the-dark pigment to it. And I was like, oh man, this is gonna look so cool. And so here I am, just mixing it using black diamond pigment, and then this bluish color over here I had left over from a project a long time ago, and I was thinking it's just going to pour black, or it's going to glow in the dark when it's exposed to UV. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. So here I am with the epoxy pour, just getting everything in the crevices. That epoxy really makes the actual wood grain pop. I think it looks really cool. Then things start pouring off the side over here, because when I did the router bit around the edges, there's gaps and holes, and I'm putting duct tape, just trying to build like a reservoir to keep it from pouring all the way out. So came back, finished it all up, and then I did a second coat, which I wasn't really going to do, but I decided, you know what, let's do a second coat just to kind of seal everything. So we ended up doing that portion of it, and that's what we're doing here. And it still looks kind of wonky, and I'm like, okay, I just think the colors just don't contrast well, and you can't really see that design all too much. But I'm like, okay, we're already in it. We're just gonna keep the energy going. And I added some glitter, as you can see there, in it, and I'm like, okay, it kind of looks cool a little bit if you stare at it long enough, I guess. And we poured the epoxy in about 2 days later, after I popped all these bubbles, just making sure that we're getting, at least we can at least not have bubbles in it. So that's what I'm doing there with the hot glue gun, not the hot glue gun, but the heat gun there. And then we get to peel off all this epoxy. And my dumbass, in spite of how much I have done these tables, kind of, sort of, I didn't put any blocks on the bottom of it, so I built up this large edge of epoxy. So then my dumbass comes back with a chisel, and I'm going to try to pop these off like I've done so many other times. But I guess I went a little too aggressive and ended up chipping off the bottom here, and I'm like, son of a bitch. And I'm like, oh crap. So now I'm in panic mode going, what the hell am I going to do? And then I try to go back and I'm like, no, just stop. Figure something else out. This is going to just ruin this table. So I'm like, okay, just throw that to the side, I guess, and figure out something else. So then I got the best idea that I could do was, because this epoxy was thick on the edges on some parts, just take it over to the bandsaw and just try to clean it up the best you can and try not to hit the edges of the actual tabletop itself. And that was about the best I can do. You can just see how ugly the bottom of it is. And you didn't see this on camera, but I had to seal and plug a couple of holes with some spackle. And this part took forever. I had to sand this all the way down because I got to get rid of the spackle that had dried on there, and then all the epoxy that poured through the bottom. So I had to do more sanding. So then I, got my other belt sander out and did this part here. And I'm trying not to scrape the edge of the table. And I'm just like, oh my God, this table is kicking my ass, because literally there are giant pockets of epoxy on top, and this belt sander did save my ass because it really did help get all those edges off. So we spent a lot of time sanding, when if I just took some standard precautions, wouldn't have been such an issue, but I just didn't know what I was doing. So then I decided to make it even uglier, and I was like, we got to put some texture on it. And I thought this would look cool. I've done this in so many other projects in the past, and I keep doing it thinking that it looks good. And I took my little Dremel, I'm just making these little divots and potholes that took forever to do. And I'm inside my workshop because it's the middle of the night, because you have to work in a cool environment because it's 1,000 degrees. And I did that all around the edge, and I'm like, okay, that's enough of that. And I'm like, oh, and I look back on it, it does not look good. So now we're gonna attach the tabletop, and I still haven't done my threaded inserts, but that's all I'm doing here, just lining everything up, just drilling some guide holes in there, and then trying to take some 15-minute epoxy that you kind of see over there off camera in the corner, and then getting these legs put on. And I was thinking, okay, just get the legs on, and then we can worry about everything a little bit later. But the legs go on relatively easy here, just making sure everything is nice and even as much as possible. And then the great thing, because they're so uneven, is this table legs that you can adjust. So we're almost done with the project. You can see the sides of it. I wish I would have done a better job on the edge. I'm just not a big fan of that. And then we're just sealing it with some epoxy, and it kind of looks cool once you put the epoxy on there, but it's still like kind of womp in my opinion. It doesn't look bad, it just doesn't look as cool as I envisioned it. But essentially that's the end of the table, and then we got it all done. You can see that edge there, it looks kind of cool. You can see the design, you can see the glitter, and you can't really tell it's bowed a little bit, but for what it's going to be, an outdoor table, it will do the job. And I couldn't get all the epoxy in there. There's some divots, but I think the next one that I do, even though this is just scrap wood, it still came out relatively good. I think the next one obviously will be better. The more tables that you build, the better the practice is. But I think this is probably the worst table that I've ever built, but the person I built it for really liked it, so I'm glad they're happy with the work. But there will be more tables, obviously. So hope you guys liked it. Hope you enjoyed it. We're doing some different things on the channel. Hope you guys like the thumbnails. The thumbnails are getting kind of crazier, trying to step up my game a little bit. But anyway, it's 1,000 degrees in the state of Texas, and hopefully this epoxy doesn't melt all over this person's backyard. So hope you liked it again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, guys. Peace.